The reason I am who I am today is because I've spent so much time, years and years, with myself, meditating on myself, reflecting on myself, reflecting on my life, on where I've been, on who I've become, and who I'm to be in the future. I've spent time analyzing different aspects of my relationships, of my actions, my behavior, my skills, my talents, my beliefs, my thoughts. I've wrestled with ideas. I've wrestled with different conflicting thoughts on reality. And ultimately, all that time I've spent in this deep reflection, this time I've spent alone, has resulted in me becoming myself. So when I go out into the world, I have the strength of being myself, the strength of having my own ideas, of having my own mind. And what I encounter often is most people, the large majority, almost everyone in society who has not reflected and found their own identity within themselves, they have the mind of others around them. They live according to ideas that are not their own. That's not really what you want to be if you're someone, for example, who's looking for what Jung says, individuation. If you want to really be yourself, you have to have your own ideas. That's what I've noticed about myself when I've come back out into the world. I have my own ideas, and that comes as a challenge to others. Most people, they will default on what other people think, and they will take that as how they should live life or the position they should hold. Because we are very social. We're meant to be social. We evolved to be social. So I'm not discounting that. But there is a time for everything. There's a time to withdraw from the world. And then there is a time to go back out into the world. You know, that looks different for each individual. For some people, actually, Jung recommended to at least one of his followers that it didn't matter if he succeeded in any way, shape, or form out in the world, that he was to devote his life completely to the collective unconscious. And I believe that for some people that is right, because there is, throughout our history, long, spiritual traditions of asceticism. Even in philosophy, someone like Schopenhauer preached more of an asceticism. And this is because for some people, it's best to withdraw from the world and never return. But I also realized within myself and my own experience, and also looking at different traditions throughout history, that, for example, Jung told other followers, another follower of his, I use the word follower, but I just mean someone who was in close company with Jung at the time. She was more extroverted in her disposition, and Jung noticed that she was not someone who was taking to these more inner reflective ideas as much as others were. She said that Jung said to her to do something out in the world because her disposition was fundamentally more extroverted. And so I've also noticed within myself that I am more extroverted than introverted, but I don't want to delve into this too deeply, but Jung did say that your type could change over time. Often that's not the common belief. People believe that your type doesn't change, but Jung definitely believed your type changed. I remember watching a documentary too, and another follower of Jung said that Jung said to him that he was an extrovert that has now become an introvert. And what that means is that his psychic libido, his energy, is now flowing inwards instead of outwards. And in the old religious tradition, that would be now someone has forsaken the world to follow God. Now, this is not meant to be a religious thing What I'm talking about is a psychological process that no matter what you believe metaphysically or what you believe exists in reality, that psychologically there is a process of withdrawal from society, from the world. There is an inner emotional and psychological healing and benefit from leaving behind the world and spending a significant time by yourself and with yourself. You might not know what to do with yourself in these moments, and that's okay. You're not meant to know with your ego what to do. You're meant to rest and wait upon the unconscious that will come up and will speak, because there's finally silence for the unconscious to be heard in your life. And so this is what I want to talk about is there is some people, and I would fit into this, who withdraw from the world and you don't really decide to come back. It or something decides, the unconscious decides. And when the right time is, you are led back out into the world to do and act upon things that you were meant to do, to fulfill your purpose, really. Even Jung in his work, even I think in his late 40s, I can't remember his exact age, but he says, there's a time where I had to be busy with work and he had to go back out. And in his, paraphrasing what he said, is he had to pay his debt to the world. And so Jung had this conceptualization that you have an obligation to provide work to the world. So, and you can't be too fascinated with or preoccupied with screwing around with yourself without first paying that debt. And so you might think that sounds legalistic or dogmatic, but it's not. It's just a psychological observation that Jung made, and he lived by that. And he did work, and he did dedicate his time to dealing with other people. Just think, none of us really lives alone. We all live in relation to other people. And as long as we always live in relation to other people, we will always have some type of obligation or role to contribute to others. That's why, for example, the most powerful and binding statements throughout humanity have involved not only one single person, but many people. For example, in the Bible, Christ says the two laws that sum up the whole Old Testament is love God with all your heart and love others as yourself. And so there is always, if we take that just as a psychological observation, love God, right? That is you not putting anything out, not putting the world, not putting other people above the ultimate value within yourself. Because the mystics interpreted God as the ultimate highest psychological value within. And that's why there's a healing emotional connection when we talk about things like spirituality, God, religion, because it's a psychological process. So it doesn't matter. You can even be someone who is agnostic and doesn't know for sure if a real God exists. It doesn't matter. This is a phenomenological experience that you have. It's a part of your existential experience that you feel a value within yourself. And there is something powerful about following that value and reflecting on that value that transforms you, that guides you, that gives you the strength of an inner personality and identity. When you have found that source or got in touch with that inner aspect of yourself, your identity is strengthened, you are transformed, you feel better. Psychologically, it's healthier. Some describe it as a healing power in themselves. Others describe it as a peace that comes upon them. But you feel psychologically right. If we are psychological beings, should not we position ourselves in such a way where we feel psychologically right? If you noticed you were sitting in a very unnatural way, where your body was not to sit like that, you would say immediately, well, you shouldn't sit like that. That's obvious. But we are not only physical, we are psychological. And this is all natural. There's nothing woo-woo about this. There is a particular psychological structure that is not physical, that involves emotions. And if you attune yourself to that way of living, to enable yourself to live along the lines of nature, you will flourish. You will flourish. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about these principles from the Bible, when I'm talking about coming into contact with yourself. So let's go back to that. Love God with all your heart. That's the first principle. That's what I mean, withdrawing from the world. Nothing should be above God. And nothing should be above that inner value within yourself, right? Now, the second principle is love others as you love yourself. So now that you've found that power within yourself that gives you the strength of your identity, that transforms you, that you've got a peace that the world doesn't have. Now you go back out into the world, but with your new identity, and you speak in a powerful way because you are now in touch with yourself. And the powerful thing about this is now you come out as a transforming agent because you have authority. And the authority doesn't come from your ego. The authority that comes when you come back out into the world comes from what Jung would say, the self or the God image. And the self is with a capital S, the self, the archetype of the self. The God image is another way Jung expressed it. Jung, in his writings, shows that the self is equivalent to the world. Your ego cannot take on the world. Those megalomaniacs, people who are delusional, people who are narcissistic, they want to be super successful because their ego is inflated. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about coming back out into the world with the power and authority that is legitimately integrated from your higher personality, which is the self. Because it is a higher personality because it's a transpersonal personality. Just as our body has a particular structure, right? Our body is not developed of just our individual body that we think of. Our body has developed across time, throughout evolution. It is a human structure. My body is not just Jared Chan, it is a male human. Do you get what I mean? Like, we all share the human physical blueprint, right? I am not a tree. I am not a platypus. I am a human. And so are you. We share that body. We share that from our ancestors, right? In the same way, we share a psychological structure. And we live out those archetypal patterns of the mind. And the mind has also evolved across time, just as the body has evolved across time. And therefore, that's why we see these patterns of mind throughout religion. And people thinking that it is literal take those patterns as something metaphysical. And that could be true. But Jung, as Jung said, he leaves that to the philosophers to argue about, and we're only talking about our experience from our psychological outlook. And so what we're to do is understand this process of introversion and extroversion and understand how the self, which is a transpersonal aspect of who we are. Just as my body has an aspect of humanity in it, of the human evolutionary structure, so does my mind. So does our minds. Our minds have a particular structure, and the self is the transpersonal mind. And throughout traditions, we've called this God. But and that's why Jung referred to it as the God image, and he refrained from saying whether there was a God beyond that image. So he tried to keep it within our psychology, because we know we experience it. And that's what he meant by saying, I don't need to believe, I know. It's because he knows the experience, the phenomenological experience of God in his life. So that means, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Jung, through his psychology, has shown that God is an indispensable part of our mind. Now, it's up to the philosopher to go beyond that, to say that if, there is the imprint of God in the mind, then we would infer that there is a God. And there are certain arguments for and against. I'm not going to get into that. On my channel, I'm open to anyone. I don't care. If you don't believe in God, if you do believe in God, or you're just somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. What matters is you understand the significance of the psychological experience. And what will happen is you'll start living out these patterns that I'm talking about. You'll see it in your life, and you will know that at least that is true. And that's all that matters, because you're living it out. And it's more important to live something out than have some constructed, rationalized belief of something. Your structured, rationalized beliefs or your rationalizations mean nothing if they're not experienced in reality. That's why ideology always misses and doesn't allow you to live a full life. And ideology will trap a person and harm a person, because it's almost like having a disease where you're not able to live psychologically healthy in unison with your underlying psychological instincts. I want to focus back on you going back out into the world with your own thoughts. Now, Jung famously said, well, this is a common thing people say he said. I can't remember where I've actually read it, but there's an essence of an idea that he gets across, is that you don't have ideas, but ideas have you. And that's because of Jung's ideas of the archetype, where people become possessed by the archetypes. And Jung did not see that as healthy, actually. And Jung actually said to avoid two different things to individuate. Remember, that's the central thing that we're talking about, you becoming yourself, right? Now, in order to become yourself, you do have to get in touch with the archetype of the self, which is your transpersonal personality, so you don't become a megalomaniac stuck within your ego. But you also don't want to go insane. You are still a living being who lives in the world, who lives in relation to other people, right? So love your neighbor as yourself. So you have to actually come back out from the union with yourself or the union with God. You have to come out into the world to love others. And you do that with your transformed identity. You do that by coming out as the new you, in a sense. You're not your old you. You are now in relationship, in proper healthy relationship with the transpersonal personality, because you had an experience. You had that emotional transformation, and that transformation unleashes and opens up a wider understanding and experience and transformative process of your identity. You're not just who you are in your ego. You are now connected to something higher that gives you power and authority to go out into the world to help others. That is a psychological process and not some religious dogma. It is an actual experience that you go through. if you follow what I'm saying, you will have the same experience, because we all live out this psychological structure, right? It is the psychodynamics of the mind. That's what Jung, Freud, Adler, that's what these founders of psychology were focused on. The psychodynamics of the mind, not merely just materialistic reductions of firing neurons. They were focused more on, like what Jung said, like the archetypes. It's not just a concept for Jung. It was the fundamental concept. It was the fundamental aspect of reality for Jung, was the archetypes. It's because we've evolved and these patterns exist, and you can't deny that patterns exist. And then you might say, oh, but it's just because we are pattern recognition machines, and that's why we recognize patterns. Well, what the hell has evolved us to even recognize the patterns? What you're saying, that us as a natural thing has evolved to recognize the patterns? That's not something that then is used to dismiss the patterns. That's something that then reinforces the fact that there's intelligibility built into nature, observing the patterns out there in the world. I'm telling you, Jung saw something that was fundamental to reality. And when you understand reality and you build upon it, it wins out. It wins out, and it will be discovered. People will, it will come back down to that. So anyway, what I want to say is, look, I'm not saying I understand everything. I'm continuously learning and growing, all right? So I'm humble enough to know that. And I acknowledge different perspectives, and that's fine. But I'm saying that there are proper arguments and ways to see what I'm saying is actually legitimate. It's not just woo-woo crap. There is, a legitimate understanding of the mind through philosophical arguments that do substantiate what I'm saying. However, no one can articulate reality. No one can prove any of this. That's why I come back to the psychology. And that's the most important aspect. If you live it and you can feel it, then you know it. And that's all that matters. Nothing else matters, baby. That's what matters. And that's what will tell you that it is true, or at least it is a truth, right? And so what I want to encourage you to do is think about yourself. Reflect on yourself right now. Whose ideas are you living out? Are you living out your own ideas, or are you living out someone else's ideas? Think about it right now. What you do, what you've chosen to do in your life. Now, I understand that there's circumstances that are practical. I'm not talking about just those. They're practical things you might be obligated to do because of society or how things are structured. But beyond that, in your spare time or just in general, because remember, wherever you have actual agency, you can choose to go here and do that. You can choose to work here, to marry this person, to do this, to focus on whatever in your life, right? What have you chosen to do? Who are you right now? Are you living out? What ideas do you even have in your mind? All your beliefs that you have, all of them. Question every single one of them. What you think of money, what you think of other people, what you think of religion, what you think of science, what you think of everything in your life, how you feel about yourself, how you relate to your mother and your father, every single thing in your life and your beliefs. How did you arrive there? What I'm trying to say is, what life are you living? Are you living someone else's idea, or are you living your own? And how do you know if you're living your own? You know, when you know yourself, you know you've got your own ideas. You know the difference. And if you don't know the difference, I dare say, you are living someone else's ideas. And that's what I'm saying, watch out for. Jung said there's two dangers in individuation I mentioned before, but I didn't articulate it enough. These are the two dangers to look out for. The false wrappings of the persona on the one hand, And on the other was the archetypal powers within the unconscious. And so that persona idea is what I'm hitting on now. Most people out in the world, they are living other people's ideas because they live so much in their persona that they get caught up in interacting with others through their persona. And that comes at a loss of their true identity within themselves. And so if you're just living someone else's idea, say you're working somewhere because someone said that was a good thing to do, but you don't really know why you chose that, then you're living your persona. You're living not even in your ego. Some people are so unpsychologically aware. They're not even living or aware of how their own ego behaves. They're living in their persona, and they've even lost a sense of their personal self in their own mind before you even delve deep into the collective unconscious. So I want to encourage you to reflect on yourself. What parts of your life are built on other people's ideas that don't naturally come from an inner root, right? An inner connection to the strength of your identity that you found within. It's like what Jesus said, and I know I kind of quote the Bible a lot, and I don't do it. I don't want people to misunderstand, to think that I'm quoting it as an authority in of itself. I'm quoting it because Jung said that the reason why Jesus's words have such suggestive power is because they articulate the archetypal structures of the mind. Something like that. I paraphrase it a little bit, but that is essentially what he said. And so this is why I think these ideas are important. So Jesus said something to the effect of, don't build on the sand, build on the rock, right? Because whatever the foundation is will be the supporting thing for that thing. And so if we take that as a depth psychological understanding for the house, so if you had a house in a dream, when we do dream interpretation, a house is normally interpreted as the personality or the person. So you don't want to build your personhood on the sand. If you build your life or any aspect of your life on what other people say and only on what they say, you're not building on the rock, because you're not building on yourself or the transpersonal relationship with the self. You're not building on that. You're building on the false wrappings of the persona, or I would say the false wrappings of society and what society told you to do. So there's a danger here, because I'm not preaching or teaching a selfishness or that you don't take on an understanding from others. You must always learn from other people. You must be wise, and you must connect with other people and not think you are better than others. You must be like a child. That's what Jesus says, right? In order to enter the kingdom of God, you must be childlike. You need that childlike aspect when you relate with others, so you're humble enough to learn. If you're not humble enough to learn, you'll become arrogant, and you won't assimilate and learn from other people and from the world. So there is a balance that I'm talking about. But ultimately, you can do both. You can learn from other people, but not be so weak that you are controlled by others or living out someone else's values or life. And at the same time, you can live your own values, your own wellspring of life that comes from within. Because each person is an individual. You are an individual. We share something together because we may have experienced similar things. We live in a similar time throughout history. We've both psychologically and physically evolved from our ancestors. We live in the same reality here, but yet we are different, because reality allows and has created lots of different spin-offs and allows lots of variety. We are different. Your path is not my path, and my path is not your path. And I don't know exactly what you're to do, but I can offer up principles of wisdom, principles to guide you, to help you, that I have found throughout our history, but also through my observation of our psychology, of my own life and my experiences, and of others and their experiences. And so we do our best to help each other, to guide each other. So you can learn from other people, but where you actually are to go, only you know, right? That's the balance of the wisdom. Every time I teach something, I don't want you to take anything in extreme. I want to teach things that are balanced, that operate through the principle of wisdom. Wisdom is like a golden mean. It's finding that thing right in the middle, which is almost like the third way, where you don't live through ideological extremes, but you live a balance of different principles, and you integrate them in your personality, and you live it out throughout your life. So you live through wisdom and strength. And as you do that, you will manifest and accomplish all you are meant to accomplish in this life. And so that's my message for you today. And I thank you for listening to me. And I thank you for being here and listening to yourself, because that's the purpose of this teaching today. Go away and reflect on your life. Spend the next week, even 2 weeks, reflecting about everything I've said in this video, because you want to know, what are you building your life upon? Who are you really? What is the source and grounding of your personality? Have you developed a proper character that can handle and live out and actually live a wise life? Have you done that? If the answer is no, you might feel afraid. And that fear is evidence that there's not a strong foundation. And now you have to look within. Now you have to look within for the answers. Don't look without. Don't look outside and copy someone else. Look within.